A year ago, two Texas towns were charging almost the same rent. Today, renting an average apartment in one of them costs $1,000 more a month than it did 12 months ago. The other town's rent actually went down. Same state, similar size, completely different story, and the difference between them isn't the economy, it's what got built on the edge of town. That town is Abilene, Texas, with a population just over 125,000. Right now, the average rent there sits at $2,395 a month, up a full $1,000 from where it was a year ago. That's not a typo, and it's not a citywide housing bubble in the way you'd expect from a coastal boomtown. This is a mid-sized Texas city, hours from the nearest major metro, seeing rent growth you'd expect in large metroplexes like Austin or Miami. So, what happened in Abilene? One word: Stargate. Stargate is a massive AI data center project, millions of square feet, built to house the physical infrastructure behind the AI boom you've been hearing about for the past few years. And building something that size doesn't just take engineers, it takes thousands of construction workers arriving from out of state, all needing somewhere to live, all at once. Roughly 6,000 workers moved into a town of 125,000 people to build this thing. To put that in perspective, that's like a small city arriving overnight, with paychecks big enough to outbid almost anyone else for housing due to their per diem and experienced trade wages. And here's the part that made it so much worse. Abilene wasn't sitting on a surplus of empty apartments waiting to be filled. The town already had a housing shortage of around 5,600 units before a single shovel hit the ground for this project. So you have a housing-strapped city, and then you decided to drop a 6,000-person, high-earning labor force directly on top of it. The result was predictable, even if nobody prepared for it. Landlords who used to rent to lower-income, long-term residents found they could charge construction crews far more instead. One housing authority in town used to place 80% of its clients into housing within 90 days. After the workers arrived, that number dropped to 50%. People who'd lived in Abilene for years were suddenly being priced out of their home by workers passing through to build something most of them will never even see the inside of. Now, here's where the comparison gets interesting. About 3 hours east of Abilene sits Tyler, Texas. Similar-ish size, a little smaller, around 105,000 people. And Tyler isn't some sleepy town with nothing going on economically. Tyler has its own boom and bust history baked into its identity. It sits in East Texas oil country, an area that's seen real oil-driven economic swings for almost a century. If any town should show us what normal economic pressure on rent looks like, it's a town like this. So what's rent doing in Tyler right now? It's basically flat. Depending on which rent tracker you look at, it's either dead flat or down slightly, roughly $25 cheaper than it was a year ago. No $1,000 spike, no sudden shortage, no headlines about workers flooding in and locals getting priced out. Same state, a town with its own legit history of economic booms driving up costs, and basically zero rent movement. Meanwhile, 180 miles away, Abilene's rent exploded by nearly $1,000 in the same 12 months. That's not a coincidence. That's a controlled comparison, whether anyone set out to run one or not. So why does this happen specifically around data centers, and not just around any big construction project? Housing economists who study this compare it to an old, familiar pattern: energy boomtowns. When an oil rig or a gas plant shows up in a small town, you get the same basic shock: a sudden wave of well-paid workers competing for a fixed, often already tight, number of housing units. Essentially, the town doesn't have the time to suddenly build enough housing to match the surge in demand, so existing renters get squeezed out by people who can simply outbid them. Data centers create that same shock, but often worse, for one specific reason. The construction workforce is enormous, relative to the size of many of the towns these projects get built in. Tech companies aren't just building a warehouse, they're building football field-sized facilities packed with specialized electrical and cooling infrastructure, and that takes a small army of skilled tradespeople to construct, often for a year or more, at a stretch. And it's not just Abilene. In Childress, Texas, a much smaller town that's also seeing data center construction, residents at one apartment complex were told their rent was simply doubling from under $1,500 a month to over $2,000. In Cedar Rapids, Iowa, local housing researchers are warning of the same rental squeeze as two separate data center projects bring in thousands of construction workers over the course of several years. The pattern experts point to is consistent. Rents go up first during construction. Then, if the facility creates enough permanent, long-term jobs once it's finished, home prices can possibly follow. Reno, Nevada is often cited as a place where that second phase actually happened. Data center development, there created lasting housing demand, not just a temporary construction spike. Now, to be fair to the data, not every study agrees that data centers are some universal rent-wrecking machine. One broader analysis, looking at data center impacts more generally across many communities, found that nearby construction employment does rise, wages tick up 3 to 4%, but home prices do not show a significant increase at a national aggregate level. That's an important nuance, and it actually makes Abilene's story more interesting. It suggests the real driver isn't data centers make rent go up, as some blanket rule. It's what happens when a data center of this size lands in a town that was already housing constrained, with a labor force that arrives faster than the local housing market can possibly respond. Drop the same project into a city with a large existing housing surplus, and you probably don't get the same shock, which means the real lesson from Abilene isn't about data centers specifically. It's about what happens when a massive, fast-moving investment collides with a town that has no leeway left in its housing supply. So here's the actual comparison, side by side. Two Texas towns, similar size, similar region, both with a legitimate history of boom and bust economics. One added a massive AI construction project on top of an existing housing shortage, and rent jumped $1,000 in a year. The other kept doing what it's always done, and rent stayed stagnant. The AI boom isn't raising the cost of living everywhere equally. It's landing hardest in the specific towns least equipped to absorb it. And for the people who already lived there, long before anyone announced a groundbreaking, that distinction doesn't feel abstract. It's the difference between staying in your apartment and being quietly priced out of your own hometown. If you want to actually understand what's driving the cost of living in this country, town by town, number by number, that's what this channel is for. New episodes every Wednesday. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next Priced Out Report.